Morning. Welcome to worship at Carmel Valley Community Chapel. It's great to see you all. We're very excited about our guest speaker this morning. I'll introduce her a little later in the service. For right now, I want to thank Wayne Clark for being our liturgist, which means come up here, please. And I want to thank Susan Estes for doing refreshments this morning. Thank you, Susan. And for our two cantors this morning, Rob Haas and Holly Thompson. And I have the unfortunate need to give you sad news that the end of this week, the Thompsons will be leaving to go back to Ecuador. We will miss you, and it's so great to have had you with us and there's John in the back, for several weeks. At this point in the service, I invite all who are able to please stand and join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
From a fragmented world, we gather today to embrace and embody a sacred holiness.
We know that no one is severed from the tree of life that sustains and connects us all. We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have gone before us. We hold fast to the good we have inherited as we leave behind that which no longer serves us in our work of repairing the world.
Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day of liberation, mutual respect, social justice, and peace for all creation.
Let us nurture the growth of loving kindness in our own lives. May it shine brightly and illuminate the way. In this spirit we gather. In this spirit we sing, dance, and pray. Let us join together in singing our opening song, We Cannot Own the Sunlit Sky. The words are printed in your song sheet.
Children have no bread but tears, and war sound their warning. God calls humanity to wake, to join common labor, that all may have abundant life in oneness with their neighbor. God calls humanity to join as partners in creation, a future free from want or fear, life's goodness celebrating. That new world beckons from afar, invites a shared endeavor. All men have abundant life and peace and joy.
At this point in our service, I invite us all into a few moments of silent prayer and meditation. I invite you to take this time to center your hearts, your minds, your bodies, your spirits into our time together this morning. After a few minutes of silent meditation have gone by, I'll play a brief musical meditation that will bring us back into the flow of our liturgy. Let us join now in silent meditation. Our guest speaker this morning is an award-winning novelist, a journalist, and a human rights activist. She's spoken about human rights all across North America and Europe, including the United Nations in Geneva. She's got 2 books out. One is a book of short stories on modern Iranian women. Echoes from the Other Land is the title. And more recently, a novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, which won the 2020 Nautilus Book Award. Ava, we are so pleased to have you with us this morning, and we look forward to what you have to share with us. And immediately following Ava's presentation, we'll have time for some questions and answers. So if something strikes your mind that you'd like to hear more of or that sparks a question, you'll have an opportunity to ask it. And then we'll also have some time with Ava after the service in Fellowship Hall, where she has some books of hers that you would like to purchase. She'll sign them for you. So let's welcome Ava Homa to the podium. Ava.
Hi, everyone. I am immensely grateful to Judy Riley for connecting me with Rick, and for Rick for giving me this privilege to connect with all of you today. I do sense a profound kinship with you today as I took part in your singing and meditation, and now I realize that even though I was born at a different place geographically, I have something in common with you, and that's the spirit of compassion and inclusion. And it is on this common ground that my heart feels close to you. I do acknowledge that tribalism is ingrained within us, but my hope is that more and more we recognize that the entirety of humanity, and in fact our beloved planet Earth, is our extended family. And it is in recognizing this interconnectedness that we have the power to alleviate suffering. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life, how I came to write this book, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, talk about what role you can play in alleviating a portion of that human suffering, if you're so inclined, and I'm happy to answer questions. So yeah, now I live in this serene coastal town of Pacific Grove. And in addition to having worked on developing my craft in literature and writing novels, I have also tried to delve into timely topics to explore the rich and complex realities of life when you happen to be born on the other side of the planet, namely in a country called Iran, to be a woman there, and especially to be Kurdish there. And people here often ask me, Ava, when are you going to write about America? And I say, but I am writing about America. America is so diverse that when I talk about Kurdish and Iranian experience, I'm talking about your neighbor and your colleagues and your community members. So, like any human child, I was overflowed with the sheer ecstasy of just being alive, eager to explore. But too soon, maybe far too soon, came the hushed warnings of the adults that I was born a crime, both female and Kurdish, in a country that prides itself to this day on its misogyny and chauvinism. And misogyny is different from sexism, as you know. It's a deep-seated hatred for women and not just a bias and a prejudice. All I yearn for, because Kurdistan in so many ways with its mountainous areas remind me of Carmel Valley and Big Sur, was to run up the mountains and chase butterflies, because poppies would paint the mountains red, very similar to California's poppies, but instead of orange, they were red. And I was startled by what a breathtakingly beautiful world it was that had wildflowers, and we had birds that would sing for us, and flowing river and music and laughter. But at the age of 6, I was told to stop to wear the black hijab, which was a shackle to my childhood, because I didn't know what it meant, I didn't believe in it, I was too young for that whole spiel. And I was told to remain inconspicuous because female body, I was told, was sinful, a wellspring of temptation that led man astray. I was told that if I was unseen and unheard, God and other men would be just fine. They preach this, and I wonder, well, how come butterflies are so colorful and they get to soar and soar around freely? And can I become a butterfly instead of a girl? I told myself that I was willing to be a simple worm and to be in a cocoon in the hope of a transformation where I could be free and colorful. But I was told that being born in the impoverished Kurdish region, the words of the famous Arab historian Ibn Khaldun always rang true. He kept saying that geography is destiny. So my lot was tied to the devastating war that ravaged Iran and Iraq, and I was in a small border town between these two volatile countries. And the war lasted 8 years. And so the initial years of my existence were marked by deafening roar of planes, the piercing sound of bullets, the relentless chaos and violence that haunted the landscape. What I will never forget is the stampedes to bomb shelters, a horrifying march of survival all through kindergarten and elementary school. So I learned to stay indoor, and I found joy and connection with the pages of books. I'm so grateful to my parents that filled our home with books in 3 languages, Farsi, Kurdish, and English. In middle school, I was told that a woman's laughter should never rise beyond a certain decibel, that good women should remain concealed and seldom seen in public. My very existence, bound to servitude, was something to be molded into obedience, lest a man's honor turns into disgrace. Indeed, the very word manhood, mardanagi, was measured by the control they had to exert over female bodies. And so repeatedly, I faced trouble at school because my laughter was too loud and my headscarf was too loosely draped, and I loved lipsticks, those crimes. So indeed, you may have heard about the brave Iranian woman fighting against compulsory hijab. I would like to emphasize that this battle is not about the piece of headscarf in and of itself. It's a fight for choice, for autonomy, and for the right to dignity. There is another aspect of my identity that has remained largely untold in US media. And in addition to being a young girl, I was also born Kurdish. For those of you who may not remember, Kurds are a distinct ethnic group so Middle East is now such a politically loaded term that the replaced word is SWANA. SWANA stands for Southwest Asia and North Africa. Now, when you hear the word Middle East, a lot of negative connotations come up, but not with the word SWANA. So allow me to use the word SWANA, which refers to exactly the same reality. Different ethnic groups live there. The major Americans usually think they invented multiculturalism. I'm sorry, you didn't. For millions of years, not millions, for hundreds of thousands of years, Kurds and Arabs and Persians and Turks, belonging to Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and ancient religions like Yazidism, which is as old as Hinduism and Buddhism, have been in the region and lived together. So Kurdish is a distinct ethnicity, different from Persian, Arabs, and Turks, the same way you have Dutch, Belgian, French. So we have our own distinct language, culture, and history, and Kurds are known for being the largest ethnic group in the world, or one of the largest ethnic groups in the world without a country of our own. Our land, Kurdistan, stan is a suffix meaning the place of, the home of Kurds, could be seen on the map prior to the First World War. But after that, when the Allies redrew the map of the Middle East, our land was divided between Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. And that decision, which was made by good people, the Allies, who nonetheless failed to see us as people and saw us only as spoils of war, started a century of suffering. Because for these 4 countries, we were considered potential threats to these arbitrary borders that were now suddenly sacred to them. And so we have been repeatedly targeted for annihilation, making us the victims of genocide. And genocide is a thing that should put the entire humanity to shame. Genocide is targeting a specific group only because of what they're born into, their ethnicity or their religion. And yet we have struggled to preserve our identity, to protect our existence, even as a lot of forces have tried to erase us. Now I'm going to put this history into personal context. that at about the same age when I was told that my body has to be hidden away, my mother tongue was also taken from me. I was educated from the first grade to be illiterate in my own mother tongue. Imagine growing up and speaking only English at home, and you start first grade having to learn literacy in German. So it was a linguistic oppression, and that created a dissonance between generations. So my grandparents' generation that didn't have to go to school. But that creates cognitive dissonance because you can't really connect with and communicate with your own ancestors and grandparents. And that deliberate targeting of culture is called ethnocide. Targeting at the ethnicity, a systematic method to create hollow shells out of humanity. So it was traumatic, but it didn't stop there. Unfortunately, the only thing that thrives in that region is poverty. The infrastructure is dysfunctional or non-existent. Medical, educational, cultural facilities were ill-equipped. What we had in abundance was imprisonment and execution. It's been over 2 decades where, even though Kurds are a minority in Iran, making up 10 to 12% of the general population of 80 million, we have constantly been a majority among political prisoners. Which means anything we do is politicized. Small acts of charity, having a community, educating the community about, suicide prevention or child marriage is considered a political act because you are trying to empower a community that are being deliberately suppressed. But I don't want to be all bleak and tell you that life was only suffering. It's really not true. From a young age, I realized that even though there were some of us that looked like they were damaged beyond repair, I also bore witness to activists and intellectuals and artists who would go out of their own way and put their own lives at risk in order to help the rest of us. And I always wondered, who were they? And what kind of wellspring of love were these people connected to? They said they knew pain, that they didn't want the rest of us to suffer as much as they did. I realized that we had no choice but to rely on ourselves. I learned that our pain was intertwined, and so our freedom would also be interconnected. And what a great lesson they were, those unknown heroes of mine that showed up at different times, although struggling themselves, but making space for other people. When I speak of books saving my life, it's not just a metaphor. It's literal. It's a profound truth. It's through the pages of books that I was able to travel around the world, and that really expanded my horizon. And I had access to mystical poetry, and what a gift it was, because those mystic poets kept telling me that the cosmos lived inside me, that I was not just a small, vulnerable, powerless girl, that I was as important as any other creature. Within the realm of literature, I discovered companions and allies beyond space of time. I forged connection when I delved into the stories of persecution faced by people around the world, by Jews, by blacks, by indigenous. And then I realized that this problem, this oppression wasn't personal, because I had earlier thought that there must be something wrong with us, that we're targeted all the time. And then I learned about the hierarchy of human structure and how we do have a desire to live in a just world at the same time as we have a strong desire to dominate, and that certain groups happen to be at the bottom of that chain. So I told you how being Kurdish and how being a woman disempowered me at a young age, but really it was these Kurdish activists and Iranian feminists that showed me it was possible to fight a tireless fight against tyranny. I know we may not win, but I choose to fight rather than die in silence and suffer in silence. So the fusion of these two aspects, the feminism, which fights for gender equality, and the fight for racial equality or ethnic equality, they became a wellspring of empowerment for me, because these people, with their resilience and their courage, found inspiration to find forces that had sought to confine us. Their unwavering spirit ignited my own and made me feel determined to challenge injustice and to reclaim the inherent power that was within me and I was denied. So I have sought to unleash the power of storytelling to reclaim the voice and agency that's denied the powerless, because that was exactly my own experience. By the age of 22, I had earned a master's degree in English from a university in Tehran called Allame Tabatabai, and I started teaching at a university, Azad University, which was in another marginalized part of Iran at the south. And that was really empowering, and it opened my eyes. So I worked as a journalist, I taught at a college, and I started publishing my short stories, but my situation was really precarious as a minority woman. I constantly get into trouble, this time with the government authorities beyond just school authorities. And so I started dreaming. I started dreaming about being able to continue my education abroad. Back then, there was no internet, no social media. People around me had no idea what the rest of the world looked like. And all I knew about America was through Emily Dickinson that I had fallen in love with, and Ernest Hemingway. So it was a far-reaching dream, and people who knew me made fun of me, but I pursued it until it wasn't a dream anymore. I did, in fact, secure admission and scholarship to go to the University of Windsor in Canada and get another master's degree, this time in creative writing. After spending 24 years in Iran, I realized that I had a gift, and the gift was the power of voice and the power of storytelling. I realized that if I hone my writing skill and I resume teaching, then I should be able to serve not as a butterfly, as I hoped, but maybe as a bridge between two nations. So that's how I published my first book in 2010. By 2015, my husband and I moved to California, where access to ocean and the mountains have really helped me heal a lot of the trauma that I faced with war and oppression in earlier years of my life. And so this book, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, was inspired by one of my unknown heroes. When I say unknown, of course I had read about Nelson Mandela and Gandhi growing up, and they did inspire me, but I desperately and terribly needed someone from my own region who maybe is not known on an international scale, but can answer my questions. And one of my questions from a young age was, how come some people are able to turn hardship into compassion? Who are they? Because it didn't have to do with gender, it didn't have to do with education or even with religion. Some people just had the power to have negative inputs and give out kindness in return, and I don't know how. So I came across this Kurdish teacher's letters from prison, a young guy named Farzad Kamagar. His crime was, he was a simple village teacher, and his crime was teaching his students to read and write in Kurdish. So he was arrested, and like a lot of other volunteer Kurdish teachers, was charged with threats against national security. Now, if my mother tongue endangers and threatens your national security, you know you have built your security upon ruining my identity. And he inspired me. He's not the first or the last Kurdish prisoner, but he inspired me because he was able to cling to his hope in humanity, despite being a very nefarious prison in Iran called Evin. This young guy, a couple years older than me, was tortured for having a Kurdish ringtone on his phone, for having an accent, a Kurdish accent when he spoke Farsi. And I thought he should submerge to self-pity and hatred, because isn't that the first thing that comes to my mind? But he didn't. He didn't. His letters was always full of love, full of hope, full of beauty. And I thought, it's possible. It's possible. Let me see if I can do the same, or at least try. So this book was inspired by his story, but then I thought, and I first started doing some research on his actual life, but I soon decided that I did not want to write nonfiction. I wanted to use the power of storytelling and have the freedom of fiction to tell more than one person's story, that I could represent, hopefully, a large group of people. And I thought, well, he was really remarkable, but what if he was a woman? What if he had a sister? What would his sister's life would look like? And that's how Layla and Shia, a sibling growing up in the Kurdish region of Iran, happened to become the protagonist of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. And Layla is a young girl who loves to make films and take the stories of her people into global stage. But Chia, who is more of an activist-minded and less artistic, unlike her sister, he attends protests. And they have been happening in Iran for the past 15 years. And Chia disappears, goes missing, and it falls upon Layla to discover where Chia is, what has happened to him. And it's through this when art and activism merge, and Layla discovers new aspects to her own personality and strength. So that's the story of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. I'm so humbled that it has won awards, that Roxane Gay, the famous critic, also picked it up for her book club. And I'm going to read a page for you. And this is a testament to my attempt to put pain into poetry, to put oppression into resistance, and to transform rejection into fuel. I'm reading from the prologue. A woman alone on the mountain at dusk. An invisible boot pressed against my throat, making my breath labored and helpless, and yet I couldn't go back and face my parents or my stifled future. Hidden behind a boulder, I hugged my knees and imagined my rage and pain whirling into a wildfire, burning down all the injustices. Could my father have known what was going on? I wanted to tell him, to share this burden with him. My shoulders were already heavy beneath the daily cruelties of living as a woman in Lanat Hawa, the damn place. This fatigue was incurable. The sun had sundered down the Sabir behind Lake Zrebar. A dozen shades of red burst open along the horizon. Below, the narrow, winding asphalt road was the hem around the hill's green skirt, embroidered with clusters of red and yellow wildflowers, the Schleer flowers, the flowers on the cover of the book. It's called crown lilies. The Schleer flowers stood elegant and tall, flourishing across the rough Kurdistan plateau, defying borders. I yearned to be a Schleer, but I was a garden of anguish, of loathing, of torment. My occupied homeland was a birthplace of death. I stood up, my breath now coming in pants. I wasn't hiding anymore. Bessa, bess, I shouted, it's enough, enough. I started down the hill in a tumbling run and found myself unable to stop. Despite the chill of the evening, I started sweating. The wind whipped my headscarf and I gained speed. I flapped as if I had wings. As I ran, a wail escaped my chest. I was headed toward the main road, toward the world of men. The streets belonged to them, judgmental men, hypocritical men. Their honor depended on women, men. Cars hurtled around the curve, full of drunk drivers who honked as they spotted me sprinting down the hillside. They were going too fast for this road, too fast for their sluggish reflexes, and too fast for their old vehicles. A white, late-model car careened down the winding road, kicking up dust. The wind roared in my ears. The white car and whoever was driving seemed to seek me out as a fellow traveler. I stumbled on a stone, crushing the shiny red poppies in the grass. And as I lurched, my untold stories tumbled inside me like pages ripped from a book and tossed crumpled into the waste paper bin. An overpowering urge to scream my story, to expel it from beginning to end, seized me. Descending the slope at a breakneck pace, my shouts crescendoing, I was unable to stop myself, this crazed woman. A final lunge, and I was airborne. And I want to, at the end, go back to the first thing I talked about, which is, what can you do? People come and tell me that, Ava, now I can't unlearn what I learned through this book, which tells you a story, entertains you, but also really teaches you a lot that media fails to do. And my answer is, please do not take your democracy for granted. Countries do go back, and you have witnessed it recently. So your decision to vote, to participate in election, and your decision who to vote for doesn't only shape the future of America. America being a superpower, it really shapes the future of people around the world. And women's fight for freedom in Iran in so many ways, in so many invisible ways, is tied to American women's freedom for justice and gender equality. Please don't forget that. Thank you so much for listening. Okay.
Thank you, Ava, for that presentation. And we look forward to a little Q&A with you now. I'm going to grab a mic so that I can hand it to anyone who has a question. Just get my attention and I'll bring it to you. But I thought I'd start off with one. A while back, we're hearing and seeing a lot about the protests in Iran. But for months now, I haven't heard or seen anything. What's currently going on right now?
Well, after the extremely brutal crackdowns and execution of the protesters and extreme pressure that they have put on families and the youth, it has died down for now. But it's important to remember the protests don't only happen on the streets. So that's the most visible form of protest, where cameras can record it and report it. But protest also happens through arts, through underground activism, through painting, through writing. So that form of protest is still ongoing, but the shape that it was taking in terms of taking to the street for good, intelligent reasons have now, for now, slowed down. But that's the reason that this Iranian government has survived for 43 years, because of their extreme brutality. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to that, when we did see in the news some of the protests, a lot of the young men were showing up, supporting the women.
Yeah.
Have those networks of men and women, are they still strong? Are they sustaining themselves in this work?
So that was a shock to the entire society, that Gen Z didn't carry the prejudices against women that their fathers and grandfathers had carried. And that was a really startling and sparkling hope for all of us. And the fact that these young men go to the streets and chant women, life, freedom, means they have come a very long way suddenly in just one generation. So that support between men and women. So here's the challenge of these young men. On one hand, they have to go to the street and fight the brutality of the state that directly shoots them and arrests them and tortures them, right? They have to go home and fight their own parents' closed-mindedness about unity, right? So these poor young men have to fight two fronts at the same time, their own families as well as the government. But there's always hope. I always have hope, and I know that they're going to continue. And this unity, this social transformation that has happened in Iran is quite remarkable, and it's not going to go away. Yeah.
Great. I love hearing that. Any questions that anyone would like to ask Ava? Laura, good to see you this morning. Glad you're here.
Being born and raised in America, I just can't even imagine what you went through and what you're still kind of going through. How did your family react to you and your writing and your vocalism? I mean, especially like your father and grandfather.
So in the beginning, there was a lot of fear and hesitation. But as my activism grew and I was able to safely get out, because it was far more dangerous when I was actually in there, and I got out and my works continued and I was able to go to different places, including at the United Nations, that's when their fear shifted to pride. And now they're happy. Now they tell me, everything that we went through and we worked for is now embodied in you, that you're the fruit of what we desired and hoped for and worked for. And it's amazing to know that I'm a continuation of a fight, that I stand on the shoulder of giants. My own father and all of my uncles have been imprisoned and tortured, so these things are very close to me. I'm very lucky that I didn't have first-hand experience of imprisonment and torture, but that I can give meaning to what they suffered through, or my generation can do that in general. Yeah, it's been hopeful. Yeah, thank you.
So impressive. I mean, again,
Thank you.
we can't imagine, we can't imagine what you've gone through.
Yeah.
And it's sad because we see it. And to your point, it's like, how can we help? And you've given us some good tools and some good resources as how we can actually help support your fight.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So your representatives look at, I know people tell me that when they write to their representative, they don't immediately get their answer, that they would take months and then they would have a form answer. But if you really just reach out to your representative and say, I wonder, how are you helping Iranian women's fight or Kurdish women's fight, and just send that out there. They do count the number of emails and letters and phone calls that goes to their office. So if they know this is on your mind and part of your consciousness, it's going to affect things. It's going to really make a big difference. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Christy.
I really appreciate your telling us, sharing everything you've been through personally, and your statement that you made about it was your personal decision to fight. And I think that we all know that the forces of humans being greedy and wanting power and material things and what have you is timeless and ancient. But I'm wondering if you see an international trend of, you talked about people with compassion that you found inspiring, not just in books, but people that you met in your own country and that strengthened you. And I wonder if you see an international trend of maybe those of us who have been kind and compassionate, and we tend to be gentle souls rather than natural fighters. And I wonder how much, how you see, is it going to be love and awareness that's going to turn the tide maybe in the world, or also fighting?
Right. So that's such an important question, which I have always thought about as an activist. The balance between accepting and fighting. And how can you turn your anger into kindness? Can you be a kind activist? If anger is your fuel, can you then transform that fuel into kindness and not be outrageous? How can you fight with compassion? And I know some of us, including myself in the earlier years, I really didn't know how to metabolize all that pain and anger into something loving and beautiful and kind and gentle. But over the years, that's really the lesson you learn. With awareness comes acceptance, right? But also when I use the word fight, it's not a physical fight. It's really a compassion for your fellow human beings that helps you go beyond your own life. And even though it looks like it's hard, it's really what saves you. It's really what saved me. The fact that I wasn't focused just on my own life, that I wanted to help other women like me and tell them it's possible to grow. So when you're talking about gentleness and fighting, I wanted to say that it is possible to be gentle and fight at the same time. That's what I strive for. That my fight doesn't come out as rage and anger, and would come out as compassion and gentleness. And compassion is a very good fight. It's the way water fights, right? It's slow, but it can really overcome rocks. And at least that's the type of fight that I believe in. And this is the type of conversation I constantly have with my activist friends, that if you can't transform anger into compassion, how do you expect this ruthless ruler to change their desire for dominance into something? So it starts with us. It's a very delicate balance, and kindness and compassion is a fight in a world that's so cruel and merciless. It is its own fight, and fighting is its own compassion. They don't necessarily have to be opposite side, even though it looks like they can be, they don't have to be. Yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
And to answer your question about international forces, so obviously there are all these spiritual groups, whether they're rooted in, Buddhism or Christianity or even mystical Islam, that talk about love as being the source of religion, that to be a uniting force versus a divisive force. And then there are intellectuals that talk about their international fight on a global stage with academic vocabulary. For example, these groups of called transnational feminists really inspired me. And there are people who use the word transnational instead of, for example, the word international, to make sure that they don't acknowledge the arbitrary borders and the separations that comes with this kind of thing. And that they talk about global gender role, and they talk about intersectionality, that your experience, your gender experience is also mixed with other layers of, your sexuality class. And so even though it has a very dry academic voice and tone, I see a lot of compassion there. Like Bell Hooks constantly talks about love, constantly talks about how love is your true fight. Yeah.
Sandra.
So, when you were talking about the misogyny that's deeply seated in your country, I know that's hard to overturn because beliefs that are that ingrained, people can't just say, oh, well, women should, and then you're changing those mindsets.
Right.
So I was envisioning what you're doing and thinking it's probably difficult to change in the country, but is the internet still free in your country where they can be inspired by what you're doing and see the world that has a different belief system wrapped around women, to where that the women and even the men in your country are still able to see that the rest of the world doesn't share those repressed beliefs?
Right, right. That is true. You can't change age-old beliefs overnight, and that's an important thing to remember, that you have to work with these mentalities and these fears, because it's really rooted in fear, right? If women are empowered, families are going to shatter apart. Everybody's going to get a divorce. There will be no stability. And understand that fear, again, from a place of compassion, because it's rooted in ignorance, really, right? So instead of hating them and pointing fingers at them, understand that it's just fear and lack of education, and then work with it. So one of the things I learned when I was really young, and we were going to these far-flung villages where FGM is practiced, and we were trying to work with it. First, the villagers would react to us like, you're imperialist, and you're colonized, and you're brainwashed, and you're here to destroy us and our families. Because we went there with our ideas, our own perspectives. And then we learned early on that if we work with like the clergies and the priests of each little village and have them go back to the Quran and talk about the verses that talk about kindness and equality and have them speak the villagers' language, we were far more successful in that way, instead of going there and telling them, you're wrong and we're right. In terms of how internet has shifted things, as Rick pointed out, this young man chanting woman life freedom on the streets, it's because of internet. It's because of their exposure to the rest of the world. It's because of also, like, really a lot of feminist men in Iran from my generation, not Gen Z, were men who watched their own mothers being abused and saw that it was wrong, and then they became really vocal supporters of women's rights. So just general human awareness is part of it. Definitely internet is part of it. And that's why as soon as protests happen, the first thing the government does is they shut down internet. It has been constant, yeah. But yeah, things have really changed with this new generation. It's fascinating. They're so open to gender equality, to LGBTQ rights, and you're like, where did you come from? How are you so different from your own parents' generation? Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Make a follow-up comment, just because whenever there's overlaps in my world with something else, it feels significant. And I was telling Kristen about my daughter's boyfriend is, because he calls me mom and he's not my biological child, I wanted to call him something that was endearing, but that kept the S-O-N to me for my own children. And so I call him Soleil, which to me, of course it means the sun. So I'm still calling him the sun. And he mentioned yesterday that my daughter's new love interest, her name is Sunny.
Oh.
He said if Adam connects with her strongly, there'll be another Soleil in the family. And I thought to myself, she wouldn't be Soleil, she would be Soleila. And your feminine character is Layla.
Yes.
And so in the title of your book is Smoke and Fire, and just the idea of a feminine hero archetype that could be Soleila, which is that fire, fight. I just wanted to
That's
just
so
comment
beautiful.
that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Kristen, do you have a question?
I had a question. What is your presence in Iran today? You're not able to be there, I presume,
Yes.
now, and you can't return.
That's correct.
And are you in danger here
Yes.
for speaking out?
Yes, I am. I have to be very careful about personal information, like where I live, and because Americans usually don't understand my precarious situation, and they come across another Iranian and be like, I know this Iranian woman who lives on the blah, blah, blah street. Please don't do that, because you don't know who that other person is. They might be a government plan, and so I have to always work cautiously. But I am still connected to the community. I still hold online workshops thanks to the internet. I still teach women about sexual harassment, gender oppression, gender violence. I'm still holding classes on digital security, suicide prevention, child marriage. I'm still very involved in the community, whether directly teaching people through platforms, where to usually the urban young women who have access to these platforms, or I do it indirectly, which means I provide the educational material and train activists who can openly go teach people, as long as the government doesn't know that I am working with these people. And really, I don't do anything political, but it is subversive, I guess, to teach people about their rights. And yeah, so.
So you've come to the land of the free.
Yes.
And yet.
And
yet.
Yeah.
And you can't speak out here either.
Well, I am
danger.
speaking out. Yes, there is danger, and I'm not the most wanted on government's list either. They have such a big list of opposition.
Yeah.
And I think not speaking in Farsi and mostly writing literature in English, they feel like I'm not as much of a threat as I were to if I were to speak in Farsi. And
Yeah. Good, thank you.
like I said, the bridge. Yeah, I am the bridge. And all those difficulties were really fierce grace. They were grace. I didn't know it at the time. I just thought, why is life so hard? But it's what built me, and it was in so many ways very fierce grace that I'm grateful for.
Well, Ava, it's been a graceful experience to
so
have you
much.
with us today. So thank you so
I
much.
really appreciate you listening, and thank you. Thank you so much.
And if any of you didn't get to ask your questions, please talk to Ava after the service in Fellowship Hall.
Well,
Invite people to share.
I'm getting lessons on how to do this, so. I invite people to share. I just was very overwhelmed by seeing a Renaissance woman instead of a Renaissance man.
Thank you, Holly.
Sure. Please give generously.
and misery relieved, where truth is spoken, children spared, equality achieved. We welcome one world family and struggle with each choice that opens us to unity and gives our visions voice. The poor are rich, the weak are strong, the foolish ones are wise. Tell all who mourn outcasts belong, who perishes will rise. For a world preparing for God's boundless reign of peace, where times and tears will be no more, and all but love will cease. All but love will cease. Everything that we have, everything that we are, every moment is a blessing from above. It's endless love that we breathe, it's endless love that we receive. What has freely come, we know that freely goes.
We dedicate our lives and all that we have to the work of love, of justice, and peace. Receive our gifts and lead us in wisdom and courage. Amen.
I need to commandeer your mic for a moment, please. At this point in the service, I invite us all to join together in sharing whatever joys and or concerns you would like to share with the community. Get my attention. I'll bring the microphone to you so that our live streamers can hear what's going on. And if there's any way in which we can respond as a community in solidarity with you, please let us know by choosing a phrase that we could repeat after you, like thanks be to God, God hear our prayers, blessed be, or whatever. Is there anything that folks have to share this morning? Dan, are you?
I am really happy that we are able to be here again. It's been a long absence, and so happy that we could be here for Ava's presentation.
Yes. I think we all share that happiness. Yes. Thanks, Dan. Rob? Yes.
I just wanted to say that watching your presentation, Ava, it just made me realize how blessed I am. You know, I was born, you know, like, sometimes I look at the way that we live in this, in the United States, and we're like kings. compared to what you see elsewhere. And so it really made me thankful for what I have.
Thanks, Rob. Oh. Yes. I also wanted to give a shout out of thanks for everyone who helped in last night's fundraiser. Christy and Wayne Clark, Jen Garbarino, and I'm sure Tom and Cassie probably helped you a lot too with some of that. And Lamont and Edie Wilson, who donated several old wines, 2 of which we got to enjoy last night. At least one was from 74. I think that was the oldest one. Some from the 80s, some from the 90s. Yeah. If there are no other joys or concerns at the moment, I invite us all to join together in a brief time of silent prayer after a little bit of time has gone by. Yes, what's wrong with my articulators? After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite us all to join together in this new paraphrased version of the prayer of Jesus. It's printed in the bulletin. Let us join together in silent prayer. Gracious Spirit, whose winds blow throughout the globe, winds of love and compassion, of peace and well-being and connection for all people, of justice and equity for all beings and for this good earth. We give thanks for all those people who have stood up to create a more just and equitable world, who have joined with so many others who have not had the resources and the privileges many of us enjoy. May we too not only feel a connection to all of them, but live and work and act out of that sense of connectedness. And through this network of love and justice, heal our world. Hear us now as we join together in saying this new version of that ancient prayer that our brother Jesus taught us to pray, saying, "Everlasting Abba, Mama, whose name is holy, when our aims kiss, communions exist in this living world here and now. Provide us today with enough food for tomorrow, and as we forgive the debts of others, we believe our debts are forgiven. To prevent despair, deliver us from evil. For the lure of your commonwealth's justice, freedom, and peace calls us forward into faith, hope, and love forever and ever. Amen." And now we have a time for announcements. I have just a few. Tuesday evening, we have our meditation service at 7 p.m. on Zoom. The link will go out Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday, we have our Board of Trustees meeting at 7 p.m., also on Zoom. And on Thursday this week at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our PCRC meets, and I'd like to have a brief connection with you, Jen, and you, Jody, about that after the service. Are there any other announcements that folks have to make? Holly.
Forget that our book group is starting up a week from Thursday, and it's such a wonderful, marvelous opportunity for everybody to just get on Zoom from all around the world. I'll be in Ecuador, and so it'll be 3:30 for me, but don't get confused about that. It's 1:30 here, and it's time. There's still time to buy the book. I get ebooks, and it's called Poetry Unbound by Padra Gautama. And so each of the 50 poems, not necessarily written by this person, we're going to be getting to look at each one of them. And so it's a time that I treasure, and I hope to see you there.
People don't know his name maybe, but he works, I think, closely with Krista Tippett, who people are more familiar with.
He has for a while. Yeah, I don't know if there's still much of a connection because his podcast is now on its own thing. Yeah. John.
When you guys joined us this morning and drove into the lot, you probably noticed the neighbor across the street has some things out. He approached me and asked when we leave, if we could be cautious of his 2, 3, and 4-year-old kids who are scooting around on plastic trikes and stuff. So just to be aware, and instead of just traversing on to bring light into the world, we also keep an eye for little ones as we go out. So thank you.
Thanks, John. If there are no further announcements to make, I invite us.
I don't know your name, but Harriet's daughter's here, born and raised
Laura.
in this church. Yeah. Amazing. So welcome, and thanks for participating today.
Okay. At this point in the service, I invite us all who are able to stand and join in singing our closing hymn, which is number 428 in the hymnal, For the Healing of the Nations. And let's sing the first 3 verses. actually taken from the lectionary text for this morning, from Isaiah 55. I think you'll recognize it. May you go forth this day in peace and in the power of love. May you go forth in peace and be led forth in joy. And the mountains and the hills will break into glorious singing, and all the trees shall clap their hands. Go forth in peace, in power, and in joy. Amen.